Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hope you're having an amazing day. Let's talk about the PlayStation 5 Pro, shall we? Because there are some conflicting reports concerning the console's release date. Some of which state that the system may be delayed until next year, but there's also an industry analyst which says that the console is on track to launch in the second half of 2024. I'll also give you guys some updates concerning my own sources, and perhaps we can make some sense as to what's going on here. So let's start out with the analyst, who is Serkan Toto. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. This is a report from CNBC. Now, he essentially told us that there's a broad consensus in the games industry. Sony are indeed preparing a launch of a PS5 Pro in the second half of 2024. Now, naturally, next year, Grand Theft Auto 6 will launch, and I'm sure most of us would agree that GTA 6 is going to be an absolutely massive game and perhaps actually end up shifting some more consoles. And I think that the PS5 Pro is probably going to be the most appealing way to play the game at launch, because it doesn't get a PC variant, a PC version on the game's initial launch window. It seems that that's going to be delayed maybe a year or so, and Microsoft, of course, are not going to be releasing a Xbox Series Pro. They're going to be moving straight into the next generation, which is looking like it's going to be 2026, according to my sources, maybe 2027, but 2026 is currently the target. It's going to be based on Zen 5 and RDNA 5 from the early information that I've been hearing. And Microsoft, of course, have already confirmed that they are working on this next generation hardware, and they should give us a deeper breakdown of what their plans are for the console market later this year. So that would be quite interesting, because if the PS5 Pro does launch later this year, it would by that point get a pretty decent install base by the time Grand Theft Auto 6 launches. Now, according to my own sources, and I've reported this in a previous video, development kits are now in the hands of, developers, which is obviously a pretty important thing. Some studios received them late last year, and other studios received them early this year. To be very clear, I do not mean Sony's own, first-party studios, for example, Naughty Dog, because they receive hardware and kind of basically they're part and parcel of the bring-up process of the console. Instead, I mean third-party studios here, not limited to Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Capcom, and so forth. So, that is obviously a good thing in terms of the timeline for the system. I was also told, under the table, that most likely it's going to be a late summer/early autumn reveal by Sony. Now, these timelines, if you look back at the PS4 to the PS4 Pro, they basically just make sense, because Sony have a history, of course, of releasing their console, whether it's the Pro variant or whether it's the original system, in November time. So you could look at the PS4, the PS4 Pro, and of course the PS5, and you'll just see that the release date is some point usually in November. So I think that makes a lot of sense. However, there have been some rumours that have been floating around on Twitter. I don't 100% know where they originate from, that there's a possibility that the console may be delayed until next year. Now, I don't necessarily know whether this is true. According to who I've spoken to anyway, so far the timeline does make sense for this year, because again, I was told that the reveal does seem to be shaping up to be, late Q2, some point in early Q3 of this year. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this. One reason perhaps they may delay it is a killer game for launch to help push the title, to push the console, or maybe they need extra time to work on software updates or kind of release those, patches to improve the visuals or whatever, but I don't necessarily know about that. Obviously, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is going to launch this month, and you have to assume that if the PS5 Pro is real, Square would already be working on the improvements for it. We also have, March for Rise of Ronin, which is another really big game, of course. And Sony have confirmed that while established IPs won't be seeing new releases until like 2025 onwards, there will still, of course, be new games that Sony are releasing. It's not like they're not going to release anything new. And again, Obviously, they also have their partners to release games as well on their consoles. Personally, I still think that it's going to be this year for the PS5 Pro. It's going to be extremely interesting, though, to see how this system actually performs in the marketplace. From the pricing that I've been hearing, it's basically going to be the same kind of price as you would expect from, well, their current console. So Sony are not going to ramp up the price significantly. It might be a little more, but I'm hearing that the target is essentially the same kind of price as what you would imagine. There's not going to be a massive gulf between the prices. So while prices can certainly change last minute, I would not expect the system to cost like $700. Ultimately, they do want to get this system into as many people's houses as possible, because obviously they need to push those console sales up. Because not only, of course, is it important from the perspective of actually, well, selling the console, but a large install base also is very important for software sales. I mean, this is a very obvious point, but let's say they release, let's just say Last of Us Part 3 next year. Obviously, that is not a leak, by the way. I'm just giving a pure made-up example. But let's just say they did. If you have an install base of like 50 million, you can sell to fewer customers than if your install base is like 60 or 70 or 80 million. And obviously with game budgets now just becoming, well, let's just use the word absurd, that's extremely important. Spider-Man 2, I think, was like $300 million to make. So that's just something they have to be very cognizant of. And obviously Sony, you know, the margins for these games now are becoming a little, let's just say, slim. And with games like Helldivers 2 doing very well on Steam, it's going to be very interesting to see whether we get day one releases for single-player games on PC. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. That's not a leak. I honestly do not know. I think live services are probably still going to get day one, cross-play with PC, but it's going to be very interesting to see if the released window between the PlayStation 5 and the PC versions are kind of adjusted, or whether more games are brought forward to the PC. As always, it's going to be extremely interesting. Now let's move on to the Switch 2, or whatever it ends up being called. So I've reported a lot of times regarding the Switch 2. I'm not going to kind of go over the whole system again. I've spoken a lot about the specifications for this thing, but ultimately speaking, it is an NVIDIA custom variant. It's the T239 chip, but obviously some of the chip is basically disabled, so we have fewer SMs probably than the maximum configuration. I've heard multiple different variants of the specifications, but ultimately this system, it's not going to be as powerful as, you know, the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5 Pro, but it does support technologies like DLSS. It does also technically enable ray tracing, but I don't think we're going to really see games using that, and maybe even Nintendo would disable it in the development kit because it would be extremely expensive. And it also seems to support backwards compatibility. Now that I've brought you guys up to speed, I was told, of course, that this system is going to launch this year, but there seems to be some updates to this. Eurogamer have also confirmed that the console is not going to launch this year. It seems like it's going to be next year, early next year, specifically in 2025. I don't 100% know what the delay is, because this hardware is not particularly complicated. It is not, you know, they're not completely designing something from the scratch. So I don't think it's something like there was a last minute bug found in the hardware. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's something like that. My guess with this console is that either they needed more time for developers to play around with it, but I think it's probably more likely that the software just wasn't ready from Nintendo itself. Nintendo have this habit of delaying stuff until they feel it's ready, which honestly is not a bad philosophy. And I would imagine it's probably a couple of things. So I would probably say that the games, some games are probably going to get like a pro patch, for lack of a better word. And I also would imagine there's going to be like a killer app or two that's going to launch with the system. So maybe they just felt that they didn't want to release the console until like whatever game, let's just say it's a new Mario game or something like that, was ready to ship with it. Because obviously they don't want to ship a console and then say, you know what, look at these reviews, they're just saying it's a bit disappointing. That's not good. So that's my personal opinion. I think that it's probably not a hardware issue. I think it's probably more likely that Nintendo themselves just want to get everything right in terms of the software. But with that said, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Leave a like and all of that stuff. Apologies for not being on camera for today, but I'm trying to sort out a few things. You know what it's like. But normal service shall resume from tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.